Okay, so this is the third video for the week 6 and maybe the last one for the chapter 5. So, and this part is pretty much important because it is kind of wrap up part for the consumer choice theory. So we start with separating two effects. We've seen the effect of price on your demand curve and the effect of your income changes on the demand curve. So we can call there are two effects on your demand curve. The first one is the price effect, right? And the second one is the income effect. What if one of two prices changes? I mean, your world consists of just two goods, maybe beers and wine. I think that's the perfect world for us. If if we have to have only two goods, and those two goods are the wines and beers, and we can still keep our life living up to the reality, I think that's pretty good one, right? I'm not a heavy drinker, but I think that's pretty good deal for us. Anyway, um, if, for instance, the price of wine increases, but the price of beer continues to be the same, then there is some changes in our mind. For instance, the wine is relatively much expensive, right? So our consumption point will move from wine to a beer because the beer is now pretty much a better deal for us. If we assume the qualities of wine and beers are the same, but the only price of wine goes up while the price of beer is the same, then I think it's better to consume more of beer and consume less of wine. That is called the substitution effect. There is some substitution between the beers and wine because they are substitute each other. Some person, some person argue that the beers and wine are complement more than the substitute. I understand that. Some of my friends and some of your professors think like that. But normally, if you assume we are a normal person, we can just consume one of the beers and wine at one time. Okay, so it is a substitution effect, and the substitution effect is happen because of the one of two prices changing. There is another effect which is called the income effect. If your income changes and there is no change in the relative prices in the market, then our mind between the wine and beers will not be changed because the relative prices are the same. So they are just the same to us. But since our income is changing, our overall budget relative to that unchanged market prices will be changed. More mathematically, the slope of budget constraint will not be changed, but only the intercept point will be changed. Okay, so we will adjust the level of the combination of consumption between the wine and beers going up or going down. So that's called the income effect, right? So now we can change. So now we can separate those two effects. So let us start with the L1 graph. Can you find out the L1 graph with our initial equilibrium point of E1? Okay. So how about there is increasing. So I think this is the different market. This is market for live music and the music tracks. So it's more interesting topics. If you buy a music from your Melon or Apple Music, then would you like to go to the live concert of that music artist, or you are already consuming the music in your ear, so you don't have any reason for going to the live concert? It is really interesting topic in the research world, and many researchers in economics field argue that music spreading out or music consumption online will boost up the demand for the live music concert, even if the music is some pirate music, which means that illegal downloading or illegal streaming music. That is also positive effect on the going to the live music concert of that artist. It is interesting, and that's the reason why so many music industry allow the pirate music situation or music cheating situation. Okay, so now we have the Spotify or the Apple Music or the Mellow Music or something, and it is really cheap to consume one song or one album because we just pay monthly like 만원 or just $9 for Apple Music, for instance. Then we can listen the infinite number of music, right? And the musicians allow that situation, even if their income goes down with that policy, because they anticipate their income or their revenue from their live music concert will be increased because of that heavy music consumption in very cheap price for a single track of music. Okay, so that's pretty interesting research topic, but we concentrate on more on some microeconomic analysis. So our initial consumption point is E1, and now we'll see there is the change of price of one good. So you can determine which good's price is changing. Live music price or the music track price. I think the music track price is going more expensive because our budget constraint is shrinks, right? Our budget constraint is L1 now shift to the left side to L2, but the intercept on the vertical line is not changing. So I think it is not income changing, but only the price changing. And I think the price of music tracks is getting more expensive. So your relative income will go down, but also the relative price of music tracks is going more expensive, while the live music price is relatively going more cheaper, right? So from E1 to E2 is our final movement of our optimal point of consumption. But the overall total changes can be separated by two parts. First part is from E1 to E star. And the second part is from E star to E2. Okay. From E1 to E star, how could you interpret the move from E1 to E star? Let's remind the meaning of independence curve. The E1 and E star are on the same independence curve, I1, right? The same independence curve means they are just the same utility. They just give you the same happiness. So E1 and E star are the only difference because of the relative price changes, assuming your income is not changing, right? Because the price changing means your relative income is changing. So, from E1 to E2, they are mixed each other. So we need to separate those two things together. So we are concentrating on only the relative price changing. The substitution effect is our first interest. So we'll fix the level of happiness at the same level on the I1. So we can see the change of your music track consumption and the live music consumption. What is changing about that? From E1 to E star, your music track consumption is decreasing, while your live music consumption is increasing. Okay? So it is called the substitution effect because the price for live music tracks is increasing. So live music price relatively more expensive, while the live music price is relatively cheaper. So you're gonna consume more on the live music, but you're gonna consume less in the music tracks. So from E1 to E star is the substitution effect. How about E star to E2? Now we see the decreasing of your relative income because of the price of music track increasing. Okay, so since your income is the fixed, but the price of one good is increasing, so you can consume less on one of two goods. So from E star to E2, your overall happiness is decreasing from I1 to I2. So from E star to E2 means the income effect. Your relative income is decreasing because of music track price is going up, right? So from E1 to E2 is the overall effect of increasing music track price, but we can separate this total effect by two parts: the substitution effect from E1 to E star, and the income effect from E star to E2. Okay. So from E star to E2, you will see the both live music and the music track consumptions are decreasing because your income is decreasing. So those two goods are which good? A normal good, right? So this is practice problem. So this is pretty much extreme case of your consumption. KC is consuming apple pie and the vanilla ice cream. And those two goods are the perfect complement to KC. So perfect complement means without one good, there is zero utility to you, even if you consume one good infinitely. Okay, so the ratio of consumption of those two goods per KC is 2 pieces of pie per week, and price per right, that is to consume only one piece of pie. So, price of pie is now increasing. Then the consumption per pie is decreased from the 2 pieces per week to 1 piece a week. Okay, so we can see the total effect of this increasing price of pie to KC by drawing out the graph. The perfect complement is drawn out like this. It is the extreme version of your concave indifference curve. It is still concave, but it is extremely concave. So, before increasing price of the pie, which were drawn out on our horizontal line, our budget constraint is drawn out L1, right? And L1 meets I1 at E1. So E1 is our initial consumption point. But the price of pie is increasing. So our budget constraint shrinks from L1 to L2. So it will meet another indifference curve, which will give you less happiness, which is I2 at E2. So we know the total effect. The total effect of price increasing of pie is moving our consumption point from E1 to E2. So now separate this total effect by 2. So the same, we can just draw out another budget constraint with the same slope after increasing price of pie, which will meet our original indifference curve I1. But now in this case, since the ice cream and the pie are perfect complement, the shape of indifference curve is extremely concave, so they will meet E1 again, right? So how about the substitution effect? The substitution effect in this case is 0. Why? Economically, you can interpret that because it is meaningless to KC to increasing or decreasing one of two goods because they are perfect complement. KC should consume both goods together to get increased her happiness or utility. Okay, so changing price of one good will ultimately affect on the consumption behavior of KC if those two goods are perfect complement. So the total effect equals to just income effect because her income will be decreased from L1 to L2, right? So consuming 1 unit of pie means she will decrease ice cream with the same ratio. So the total effect equals to the income effect. There is no substitution effect because they are perfect complement. Okay? Interesting? So now we'll study about the given good. Okay? So if a good is inferior good, then the income effect and the substitution effect move in the opposite direction. Why? This is kind of practice problem for you guys. You can just think logically. Inferior good means that if income goes up, then your quantity demand is going down, right? So you can just practice by yourself with this simple graph. If a good is normal good, income goes up, then demand goes up. But if it is inferior good, income goes up, but demand goes down. So the income effect and the substitution effect move in the opposite direction if the good is inferior. Usually income effect is smaller than the substitution effect, which means that even if it is the inferior good, the inverse effect of income, which means that if it is inferior, then income goes down, then the demand goes up. But the price changing, if the price of this good is increasing, then there will be some negative substitution effect on that good, which will be overwhelming the income effect, right? So usually, if the price goes up, then the consumption for that good will be going down, even if it is the inferior good. The income effect will give more consumption for that good. Okay. But sometimes there is really weird good, which means that the income effect overwhelms the substitution effect if it is a normal good. Sorry, if it is the inferior good. So if a good is inferior good and the income effect is larger than the substitution effect, then it is called the given good. The given good is really extreme case of inferior good, which is hardly found out in our real world. So this is a practice problem for the given good. This guy is really weird guy. This guy is the strange guy. I cannot understand this guy. So this guy buying a rice, and rice is a given good to this guy, Byung-hyun. So could you draw out the Byung-hyun's weird consumption structure of the rice? So his original budget constraint is L1, and we know the rice is the given good, so the income effect will be larger than the substitution effect. So we know the total effect will be decreasing even if the price of rice is increasing, because the income effect is overwhelming the substitution effect. The substitution effect means that if the price of rice is going down, then we know the budget constraint is going up outward, so there is more consumption for rice. But since the rice is inferior good as well, so your income is increasing, so your demand for rice will be decreasing. Usually, substitution effect is larger than the income effect in the most of inferior good. So there will be increasing of that good, even if it is inferior good, if the price of that good is decreasing. But in this case, since the price of rice is decreasing, we expect Byung-hyun will consume more rice, but the rice is the given good to him. So the total consumption after decreasing price of the rice, he consumed less than his initial point. It is really weird, but the given good is the good like that. So this one is a little bit of difficult norm, but the same story. So we can separate the two variation, the compensating variation and the equivalent variation. The compensating variation means that the amount of money if you'd have to give a consumer to offset completely the harm from the price increase. Okay, so if the price of that good is increasing, then the consumer will be maybe punished by the market. Then, and you want to compensate that kinds of amount of punishment by the money. That's the compensating variation. So the reason why we think about this kinds of concept is that the economists want to estimate the amount of effect of price on this market. How to estimate? It is really difficult because it is really abstracting. It is hard to estimate. It is not discovered by the statistics. So the economists created or invented some imaginary tool or imaginary policy, which is the compensation, right? So if you have to compensate one guy who is affected by the price changes in the market, then how much money will be equivalent to satisfy or to compensate that guy? So that's the concept of the compensating variation. The equivalent variation is the amount of money one would have to take from the consumer to harm the consumer by as much as the price increase or decrease. Which means that, so this is the same way of the estimation, but the opposite direction. If you observe the price changes, so in this case, it is price increase, then the consumer will be affected. And you want to make the same effect with that situation. Okay, so how much money you're gonna get from that guy which is affected by the price changes, and you wanna make the same effect, exactly the same effect on him if he is affected by the price changes. So this is equivalent variation. So there are two ways of estimation of the changes of prices in the market. One is the compensating variation, and the other one is equivalent variation. And the last part is some macroeconomic things. In the modern macroeconomics is usually founded by some microeconomic foundation. So we are studying the microeconomics. The first part we did was the consumer choice theory. And maybe next week we're going to study about a firm theory, the producer's part. So the consumer part and the producer's part, and the third part will be the government part, or the fourth part will be the market structure. Those kinds of things are the kinds of foundation for the modern macroeconomics. So modern macroeconomics is totally based on or the dependent of some microeconomic foundation. How about some index, some macroeconomic index? The most representative macroeconomic index is the GDP, but except of GDP, we think of inflation. Inflation, what does the inflation mean? So it is the percent change of the price increasing or decreasing over time. So before going deeper into the inflation concept, we have to separate the two important concepts, the nominal term and the real term. The nominal price is the price as it is representative in the statistics. So if your overall consumer price level is changed from 100 to 105 in 1 year, then your inflation rate, the nominal inflation rate, is the 5%. But the real level of inflation is a little bit different. Real term is estimated by how we remove that nominal variation from the real activities. So some economists want to observe the real market activities only. So they want to separate the real activity and some nominal value changes. For instance, the inflation is one of the nominal value changes. If you buy the same quality good in 100만 원 or the 200만 원, some economists, they argue that there is no change because the quality of that good is the same. But some economists argue a little bit differently. So we need to separate the nominal term and the real term first. And the inflation is the key for many economists to separate those two terms. So we're going to study about the inflation a little bit. So one of the most used index for inflation rate is called the consumer price level, or the CPI. The reason why we study about some macroeconomic index in this microeconomic world is pretty much impressive to us when we apply some knowledge about those two effects, the substitution effect and the income effect, into some macroeconomic index changes, which is pretty much related to our real life. We see in in the scenario case. Okay, so first of all, we study about how to calculate the real price of one good, okay, by using the CPI. The CPI is kind of average price of bundle of goods which are heavily consumed by the consumer. So the CPI does not estimate average for all goods consumed in a nation, but the selected goods over time. So by using the CPI index, we can compare the price changes of one good from the past to the present or during specific time span. So for instance, if we have the CPIs for 2013 and 1995, then we can calculate the real price of one good. Now it is a hamburger by using like equation 6. So this equation is relatively not important, but the important thing is that there is the real price and there is a nominal price for it, and we can separate those two things by using the CPI index. The scenario is that there is one woman, her name is the Sujin, and the Sujin is luckily hired by a company, not in short term, but in long term. So she is the regular worker or the 정규직. But her contract, there is one weird clause in her contract. Her company will give her the salary, which will be automatically adjusted to the CPI increases. Which means that, for instance, if the CPI increasing by 5% this year, then Sujin's salary will be automatically increasing by 5%. So so it seems pretty much a reasonable contract, but it has a little bit of pitfall. The question is that what is the difference between the using the CPI to adjust the long-term contract and the using a true cost of living adjustment? So now we can compare the adjustment methodology by using the CPI, and we'll now later define the true cost of living adjustment. And there will be some difference between those two. So in this scenario, this contract paper indicates the adjustment way by using the CPI. So what do you think about this CPI adjustment? It seems pretty much reasonable. If the CPI increasing by 5%, then your salary will be increasing by 5%. So it is widely used in many countries, even in the South Korea. So if you are hired by the government agency, like Ministry of Finance or Ministry of Education or something, then your salary will be automatically adjusted by the CPI increasing. But economists say it is not correct adjustment. We'll see how and why. Because this adjustment ignores the substitution effect. Let's see the example. Sujin consumes the clothing and the food. Okay, so her first initial consumption point is at E1, but by the CPI adjustment, there is the overall level of CPI increasing, not increasing of price of food or clothing equal ratio, which means that there is some changes in the relative price of clothing and the food, but the adjustment CPI will target to fix E1 point. So E1 is kind of axis to circulate or turn around, but the relative price of food and clothing is changing by the CPI adjustment. So the second year's consumption point will be moved from E1 to E2. But the problem here is her utility is now increasing from I1 to I2. So the economists argue that it is not right adjustment because her utility is changing by CPI adjustment. So the economists argue that the true cost of living index is defined by an inflation index that holds the utility constant over time, which means that the Sujin's utility should be the same over time, and the employer will have to make adjustment for targeting that fixing her utility, right? So let's see the difference between the true cost of living adjustment and the CPI adjustment. The target for true cost of living adjustment is to fix her utility at the I1, right? To do that, the second year's the consumption point will move from E1 to E star. Okay? So not E2. So the E star is the new adjustment level. But we know there is some relative price changing because the price of food will not be the same increasing with the price of clothing. So the percentage change of food will be different from the percentage of the clothing over the time. So the L, not L2, but the L star is the true cost of living adjustment here by the employer. So here is the table for the comparison. So if there is no adjustment, the price of clothing is increasing from $1 to $2, and the price of food is increasing from $4 to $5. So that's the scenario. And income of Sujin at the first year is the $400. So the percentage of changes in the clothing price and the food price is different because the price of clothing increasing by 100%, while the price of food increasing by just 25%. So their portion of increasing is different. So the relative price is different from the first year to the second year. If there is and the utility of Sujin at the first year is 2,000. So that's the given number. If there is no adjustment, so her income is the same with the $400, then she's gonna have to decrease her consumption for clothing and the food by 100% and 25% respectively. So her utility without adjustment will be pretty much smaller than her initial utility, like 1,265. If there is a CPI adjustment, which means that an employer will compensate her salary by just increasing the total CPI. Okay, so you can calculate the difference of the CPI from the first year to the second year. You can calculate it, and the calculation result will give her the increasing salary by $250. So she can consume more clothing and more food. But the problem is that her utility is now increasing with the CPI adjustment. That is not the appropriate adjustment for a firm. So the true cost of living adjustment will fix the utility first. And by fixing the utility, the employer will recalculate her income that holds her utility at the same. So her income is now changing from the $400 to less than $650. But still, she can consume less clothing, but more food. So the problem of CPI-based adjustment is the CPI-based adjustment ignores the substitution effect between the goods because they looks at just overall CPI changes. So the true cost of living adjustment fix the level of utility of a consumer, then calculate the changes of income later. So they can fix the problem of ignoring substitution effect. Okay? So that kind of one application of our knowledge for some macroeconomic index, which is pretty much interesting to us. Okay, so this is the last page of this chapter, and you can go to the next chapter in the next week. See you later.